Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Shreen Mahmood, and you're joining us for another virtual conference by Muslim History Month, powered by World Hijab Day organization. Now, today's topic discussion is, of course, Muslim women leaders shaping global politics and advocacy movements. Um, I am so sure that every one of us right now is gripped and is witnessing tragic events unfold, what we thought wasn't going to happen or what we were praying wouldn't happen in Gaza has actually happened. So, this is why discussions like this and leadership, politics, global politics, why it's so important for us as Muslim women and Muslim men to actually, empower ourselves and understand what's happening around the world and impact change, inshallah. So let me introduce you to our wonderful guest who's joining us today, Dr. Emie. Dr. Emie is, has many accolades, many qualifications, many expertise behind her, including PhD, ABD. She's an adjunct professor at Fordham University. Economist. There's so many things here that I'm going to let her join and talk to you about. But what's really interesting is, the fact that she's done history with regards to, political science, history, and global studies from the University of Minnesota. So this is something really important to us. So, it's our honor to welcome Dr. Emie to the stage. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. I'm excited for this. I'm very honored that you asked me to speak today and be a part of the organization. The last time that we spoke, we had a wonderful time chatting about historical figures that were important in the Muslim community that have shaped different, elements of who we are today scientifically. And so I'm excited to be able to chat today with you about various contributions of, Muslim women in the community from an international perspective.
Amazing. And thank you so much for taking time out and joining us because, like I mentioned, the current climate I think that there's a very there's a heaviness in the air for sure as we're witnessing what's happening. So if we go on to the first question, I mean, role models and, women that we look up to who have, like you said, impacted change as we know it. So what are some of the notable examples of Muslim women leaders that you would think, in your opinion, have made significant impact?
So when I'm seeking, various leaders internationally, I'm always looking for somebody who's been able to make immense change or set the path in a manner for women to say, listen, I can do this too. It's not just a man's world, right? So that would include three people that I've selected that I think would be very important. And the first one is Halima Yaqub. Halima served as the 8th president of Singapore, and she was the first president, I believe, of Singapore. She was in office between 2017 and 2023, and she did not choose to, become reelected. She actually actively chose to not seek reelection. After that, she was appointed as the chancellor of the Singapore University of Social Sciences, and she accepted that post afterwards. Her original passion was in labor movements and in how the workforce is, and was one of the very first women that was inducted to the international labor unions in Europe. So she's had, an illustrious career. Again, her name is Halima Yaqub. I encourage everyone to look her up. And she's had, very important strides. I remember when she was in office, one of the critiques she had was that she wanted to continue living in her housing development. And her housing development was basically what we know in North America as public housing. So she actively chose that to show her solidarity with those that are of the masses and, didn't want fancy housing. And and that aligned with her vision and her theme of how labor movements and organizations would play out. So she really fulfilled that in setting kind of a standard of being one of the people, being a part of the people, a part of the community. The second person that I wanted to point out is Dr. Vjosa Osmani. And Vjosa Osmani is the president of Kosovo. She is the current, she is the current president of, I believe, yes, 2021 she took office. She had graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a JD and with a doctorate of juridical science. So she knows regulations and she knows policy inside out. And I think what's notable about her isn't that she's just a female Muslim leader of Kosovo. We know the history of Kosovo. We know the history of that region of the world and, what transpired, 20, 25 years ago in Kosovo. But what's notable about her is that she actually wrote or helped to write, to a great extent because of her background, the Constitution of Kosovo. So you have a female Muslim woman who is writing regulation and policy at the highest level, nationally that affects transnational politics. In 2011, she was also a social inclusion champion for her role of, trying to propel social inclusion in Kosovo in order to get the country up and running to reach a democratic government, basically. So I think seeing a woman at that level in Europe, right? So I remember the last time we had spoke, we had discussed about the effects of Islam in Europe. And now we're seeing not just Islam in Europe, but a woman who is of Muslim heritage, who is of Muslim religion, of background, who is able to affect change to the level of a constitution in a country. And then the third person that I'd like to mention is Nejwa Boudin. And this one is very near and dear to me, I think, because my heritage is Egyptian, and North Africa is very important to me. It's important to my studies, to my academia, to everything that I have put my passions into has been significant towards the MENA region, in particular with North Africa. And Nejwa Boudin was the very first prime minister of Tunisia. The reason that's important is because she is the first woman prime minister in an Arab country. And it's huge. So we hear about, women being in office in other regions of the world, but it's rare that you find a prime minister in an Arab country that is a female, especially given that we are in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. So she was in office from 2021 to 2023. What's great about her is that she's also a university professor. Her background is in engineering, and her goal is to modernize education in Tunisia so that it meets the standards of the world today. And that was evidenced through her brokering a deal with the World Bank that was, I believe it was $70 million in order to reform education so as to tackle unemployment in Tunisia. So instead of just attempting to tackle unemployment, she took the base of the issue in terms of reforming education so that there would be a stronger labor force. So when we're talking about significant female leaders in our day and age, it would be poignant to point these three women out because they haven't just become presidents and prime ministers overnight. They started somewhere with a social justice platform that aimed to help the masses, irrespective of gender. They didn't see male, female. They saw society and community needs, and based on those needs, they, pushed themselves in order to reach those highest levels because that's the only way that they could see that they'd be able to make change. And that's incredible. The other thing, is that all three of them are married. They all have kids. I believe Halima Yacoub has 5 children. So to have that kind of a career and still have children is really, it's very, very exciting to see as a woman.
Honestly, yeah, very inspirational what you've mentioned there. And it's I'm glad you mentioned the fact that they are married and they are mothers and they are still, in huge positions of impact and influence, and it serves as an inspiration and empowerment to other women, which sort of brings us on to the next question about, yes, we have allyship with brothers and male counterparts, but specifically in terms of women's rights and encouraging more women into perhaps office or in positions of power, women in leadership positions have a pivotal role to play. What do you think about that? And have these women and other, influential women, have they been pro women enough?
I think that there's two responses to that, because I think women that are in national or federal or parliamentary positions, yes, they do have a responsibility towards ensuring that women have rights in society. But when you take on a position like that, you're responsible for the whole. And so being able to have that perspective as a woman is incredible, because you constantly see male politicians, no matter what their religion or their background is, and perhaps the perspective of women may not be, I don't want to say put into consideration, because in an ideal world we wouldn't see gender, right? But the reality is that the nuances of what women go through in society may be more understood by a woman that is in power, that is in leadership, that has that perspective. And therefore, knowing that might empower women to be able to have a bigger voice or a louder voice in society. And I think that's what these three actually bring to the table. So, for example, we take, former Prime Minister of Tunisia, Najwa. I'm sorry, her name is not Najwa, it's Niglet. Niglet Belden. Um, you look at her, she's in education, she's an engineer. And so now we have a woman who is entering the male workforce in a predominantly male dominated career path, which is engineering. And she's not just doing that, she's also able to get elected and push that further. So that in itself, the fact that she's already in a career that is not female dominated, is empowering to see. So you can imagine the impact and the optics of that when you are a prime minister. So you've now passed this level of, I can do this as a career, but now you're setting a standard for little girls and women, saying, okay, well, she was able to be an engineer, and not just that, she was able to be a prime minister in North Africa in the post-Arab Spring world. So when we're talking about women's rights and empowerment and the communities that they live in, what better example than a woman who can survive in a man's world, technically, right? And we are starting to see in the United States at the educational level and the academics that more women are entering engineering fields and more women are entering STEM fields, right? So then when you allow women to see that they can do this, that they can enter that field, and at the same time rise to the highest ranks in order to effect change at the community level, you have a powerhouse on your hands, and that should be applauded. Not the fact that she's able to get elected, and if she had any connections, I'm not talking about the Prime Minister of Tunisia in particular, but just anybody, if they have, certain connections to get to where they need to go and whatnot. No, that's not affecting change. Affecting change should be based on the merit of what women do on the ground in their communities, and then are able to take that to a higher level so that their voices are not just heard, but used as a hero example, in a sense, for other women who want to follow that path. We see a lot of students at the collegiate level where, their parents might not be okay with their career choices. I tend to see this more often than not, unfortunately, in minority communities, right? Because there's an assumption that there's certain roles for women, and of course we have generational differences and expectations of how women should perform once they're done with college, and I think this kind of leads to the next few questions, but there's this assumption that you finish high school, then you finish college, and then you go to your husband's house and you have kids, and then the whole cycle starts again. But that is not our sole role in society, frankly. And if there's any example of that, it's Sayyida Khadija, who would have scoffed at that concept that I'm just supposed to be a housewife, when I was an incredible businesswoman in a period of time where trade routes were through vast deserts to get products sold. So we have the examples in Islam to say that women are strong and women are capable, and I think that's the key. The key word is capable. So empowerment, in my opinion, is based on capability. Do you have the capability to thrust forward, right?
Mhm.
And so once we get that into our heads that you do have that possibility, that's when we can begin to see women in specific societies. And I'm obviously referring to the MENA region and Southeast Asia and whatnot, and non-Western areas. That's when you start to put that idea in their head that you can make a difference. And here is a good example of somebody who's done it. Here's a prime minister, here's a president, and here's somebody who wrote a constitution for a country. It doesn't get better than that.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head when you're saying that actually perhaps we haven't been bringing up the next generations and the children with the idea that you could be prime minister. And the reason this touches home to me is because I remember, back at school, and you're going through education here in the UK, actually. So I'm based in the UK, and we had a running joke because I did a project in geography once, and I said about making the world a better place. So every couple of paragraphs, I'd interrupt the presentation with to make the world a better place, and as simple as that. And we used to joke about, when I'm older, I'm going to be prime minister. But now that I've got my girls and my daughters, I make I make a point of it that my youngest is actually going to be prime minister. That's what she's going to, because she's that way inclined, or and encouraging people into roles. You have to have the representation. You have to have role models, and the examples you've shared have been absolutely brilliant, because that's of course what we need. We need women in positions to affect global politics and
Right.
movements.
And I think also there's a thing to be said for politics, right? It always seems that when you see a woman that is rising to those ranks, that there's always an element of, oh, well, her dad got her in. Oh, well, her husband is this guy. Oh, well, she comes from a rich family from who knows where, But that isn't the case with these three women.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case with the three women I've chosen to speak about. One of them, went through the education process of becoming an engineer. She didn't have to be an engineer. And from there, she went into academia, and from there, she went into politics, right? I'm not saying that they're not political. They're all political. But I'm saying that their rise to where they're at didn't necessarily have to begin with a political opinion. I mean, in the US, it's not like a child wakes up and decides I'm a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, right? They
Sure.
look at the world around them and they learn from that community. And so when you see someone like Neglet Bowden from Tunisia, who's like, I'm going through this process of becoming an engineer, and I know that I'm not just in a male dominated career path. I'm in a society where a lot of things are being, pushed against me to become an engineer and leave my house and not raise my kids and, not teach them this and that. So I remember also when I was reading about these three that the effect that their male figures in their families had, right? And that resonated with me. My father is my best friend. He is the source of my strength. And it's been like that since I was a child. If I failed at something, my father would always say, that door closed, 40 more are going to open. And then go chase it.
Mm.
And so I think one thing I'd like to add to that question about how can women leaders be empowered, right? They need to look at those that are around them, that are strong and that support them and that believe in them, and they need to stick to them.
For sure.
Don't think that because one person said you failed at something, that another person is going to close that door on you and you're not going to have a mentor. Everyone needs a community mentor. Every single person. I guarantee all three of these women had strong community mentors or, strong advocates for them to be able to advocate in society. And in my case, it was my father, and it's always been my father. He's, my biggest supporter. So I know that, when you are trying to do something, you have to find your support system, right? In order to be able to get out on the front lines and, advocate or support whatever your cause may be. It doesn't matter what it is. There's got to be somebody in your corner that says what you're doing is right, and I support you. And I guarantee that all three of these women have had that in their life, whoever it is, whether it's a male figure or not. But I think empowerment of women, especially in the Muslim community, is not taken into consideration. You see, let's just say any senator that's running for office and in the United States, and who was your source of power, right? You don't see that often asked of Muslim women. Who is your source of power, right? Who is your support system? How did you get this far? Like I said before, they didn't just become prime ministers and presidents out of nowhere, frankly. It was a process, and you have to trust that process.
And it's interesting because I suppose, so the question is in front of me is, how do these women leaders challenge the stereotypes? And we've mentioned a few things. You've mentioned that they're married. One of them had 5 children. SubhanAllah. That's a pretty busy
does have
man,
5 kids, yeah.
And it's not just about how women leaders are passing those barriers. It's more, what else are we doing as a community? And like you mentioned, it's about who you have in your corner, and how are we actually holding the Muslim community to account? Because not only are Muslim women known as being, the most marginalized, if they're darker skinned, that's another layer. If they choose to wear hijab, that's another layer. There's a lot of barriers that are put up, that because you look different, because you are different, because your faith is different. And I do, maybe I'm suggesting as well that the power is also from faith. And absolutely, because these roles, although politics specifically has been downplayed within our communities, perhaps it's a dirty career to go into, especially for women. Can women handle it?
And it's everywhere.
Yeah,
you can't avoid politics.
Every career, every industry, every organization has its own systems, has its own sort of political thing that if you're not within, you get so I think it's super important for us to understand that actually, if you have a purpose, and I think more often than not, perhaps maybe because I'm pro-woman, I am a woman, it's because there is a nurturing element that we have as women, a more humanitarian sort of bringing up the community, making the world a better place. Maybe that is why there needs to be a massive push for women.
It's interesting you say that, because when I was trying to pinpoint 3 women that I thought were pivotal, and the list, there's many women that have been prime ministers and presidents and whatnot, of countries that are Muslim. But these 3 in particular stood out to me because they were based on social justice platforms versus looking at, Department of Defense or war, how do I put this? They were looking at more policies and regulations regarding war of any sort, right? And I found it interesting because there are 3 platforms, right? Constitutional, or actually not even constitutional change, but the creation of a country by writing its constitution, education platform, and labor platform. Those don't have to be political. Those affect everyone, and every single person in the country has those issues. Like, every person has an education issue, every person has a workforce issue, every person has to follow the Constitution. And I find that women that focus more on those social platforms tend to strengthen those platforms more than to go down the politics realm of let's focus on how this war is going or how defense budgets are going or whatnot, right? These social justice platforms are timeless. They're issues that have been there for centuries. Not to say that war hasn't been there for centuries, but wars change and enemies change, right? But education, it's still, you have to be educated. I mean, look at our dean. The very first, the very first ayah is اقرأ بسم ربك الذي خلق الإنسان من علق, And so the Quran is telling you to read, right? God is telling you to read. So that's timeless, right? And then the other platforms are the same thing.
For sure, for sure. You know what? It's a very refreshing conversation to have, actually. That we're talking women leaderships, and yes, we can see. Are you back? I think we lost you for a brief.
I'm sorry. I think we just momentarily got disconnected.
No worries.
I don't know what happened. Yes.
No worries. No worries. Technology.
And so my point is, to answer that question, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. But when we're talking about stereotypes and misconceptions, we can go back to multiple narratives on that, right? We can always make the colonial narrative of how European nations came into Africa and Asia and colonized them and imperialization and whatnot, right? My academic focus has been on the impact of globalization and economics and urban planning in the Arab states, and that's been my focus. But you can make the same narrative about women, right? Because the assumption is that in the discussions of colonial histories, women are not necessarily put into consideration. You don't see suffrage movements often. Suffrage movement seems to be more like a Western conception of women having the right to vote, when in reality, if we look at Islam, women have similar rights, as men. Like there's no discussion on the impact of race or gender when we're talking about Sharia law, right? Mm-hmm. And we're looking at the jurisprudence that is put in front of us. And yes, there is discussions on women and in the deen, right? But what I'm saying is from a politics perspective and from women coming to power and women being able to rise, that is not gender should not be put into consideration for that, right? So
I think Islamically, for sure,
with the three leaders I've mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think Islamically, perhaps, I don't know if this is out there saying it, but for me, if you study Islam and you see the women role, if we're looking at Khadija radiallahu anhu, if we're looking at Aisha radiallahu anhu, if you think about it, really, is it out there to say that perhaps our religion and our family units were supposed to be quite matriarchal? And have we actually, the more we've progressed in modern society, although yes, the suffragette movements and all of that is separate, it's for the West, we perhaps didn't need it because it was already ingrained, women's rights.
Correct. And by the way, no one is saying don't have a family. Mm-hmm. That's the important thing. No, none of these women, all of these women have families. They're married, they have kids, they were moms, they, raised their children, etc., etc. But they also had careers.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
It's entirely possible to have both. And because, and I think it's important to point out that Islam is not privy to social custom, right? In its purest form. There's a reason for that, and it's because Islam, the Quran stays as it is, and Islam stays as it is, but the times and technology changes throughout history, but the core of deen doesn't change, right? And if we just ingrain that concept into women's heads, then they'll realize, wait a minute, this is the rule book, this is what is asked of me by God, and I can also do this because this is also in the deen. And once you take that social stereotype out of what's expected of you as a woman, and you instead just follow the book, right? Then you're going to find that you are able to answer to God at that point instead of society.
For sure. And I think it is the religion we have.
I wish more women would realize that, because I think if more women realize, it's permissible. It's permissible for you to be a strong leader. And yes, you have other familial duties if you decide to get married, et cetera, and whatnot, but the reality is you can do both. And if you have a good work-life balance, it's entirely possible. I mean, I have 2 teenagers. I have 2 children, and I still have a full-time job. And I'm still trying to I have ambition. I have
For sure.
So it's not, it's possible. It's entirely possible.
And I think it becomes this, isn't it? We all have a short life. We are ambassadors on this earth. We have been told we have a certain amount of leadership within ourselves. We have a purpose to fulfill. And it's actually duty on us when we see injustice, when we see something going wrong, something that isn't, aligned with our values. And I think, of course, there's a duty there to be fulfilled. And I do hope, and it's like you said a few times throughout this discussion, is education is key. And bringing back what Islam says when, when we have cultural barriers saying that, no, I don't think it is. I think Ustada Yusra just came out and made a post about actually, parents giving, sharing fatwas about not girls not being allowed in these college encampments to stand up for what's happening in Gaza because of the free mixing and because of this. And she quite powerfully put out there that actually this isn't free mixing. This is standing up and speaking up against injustice is duty on us. So we can quite often get bombarded with a lot of cultural things that hold us back. So I hope, and there's so much more that I'd love to stay on this topic and that we could share and that you could share as well. But if we go on to the next question, I think about grassroots movements, and I'll be honest, I'll have to mention someone myself here, and it's Muna Al-Kurd. And, with grassroots movements led by Muslim women, impacting social change, on international level, I would say Muna Al-Kurd. Back when hashtag Save Faith Jarrah came out, and even her brother, and all of the things that impacted afterwards, I think we're here right now, where the whole world is ready to protest again on Saturday, and there's huge changes. So my personal, someone who I look up to is, Muna Al-Kurd, who set out about this viral social media campaign. So you tell us a bit more, and what do you think?
So I wanted to put together my heritage and to be able to give two women actually that I think have led incredible grassroots movements, and they're, everybody knows them in the Arab world because of how much change occurred because of their impacts. And the first one is, and again, I'm Egyptian, as I've said before, so I'm going to, trace back to my roots. And I'm going to say Huda Sha'rawi is the first one. And Huda Sha'rawi was born to, I believe she was a mother from the Caucasus Mountains and a father that was Egyptian. She was in the south in Egypt, raised in the south in Egypt. And she, her family was upper class, but at the time, women would wear a specific veil that it was a very specific Egyptian veil that was worn pre-1930s, I want to say. And anywhere women would walk, this type of, I don't want to call it a khimar or a niqab, but it was a specific veil. And she was coming back from a conference, and of course she knew that her family had some type of clout, likely, which she was able to mobilize. And coming back from a conference, and she took the veil off in public. Mm-hmm. And it was not a sign of the removal of the veil so that you could, lose your deen. No, it was a sign of suffrage, essentially, right? Suffrage, and I don't just mean in terms of voting and whatnot. I mean, we are here, and I will do what I want with my veil. And I want to set an example for other women to know that they don't have to take their veil off, but that we need to be heard. And so Huda Sha'rawi is kind of a national treasure, I would say, in Egypt, right? And that actually set the standard for women being able to have voices is what it really did. So even though it was masked in the removal of the veil and, maybe, lightening Dean, that's actually not what the purpose of, even though it appears that way. That was not the purpose of her removing the veil. The purpose of her removing the veil was to say, we have voices. And so she became a very popular writer in the West, because the West had always thought of women from the Middle East being just veiled and staying at home and cooking and cleaning and birthing and just, woe is me, I'm a woman from the Middle East. And she said, no, that's not how I want our society to appear to the West, because we will not only meet the standard of what women are going through in the West, but we will also conquer it to show you that we are also here. So she's one. And then during the same period of time, there was another woman, and her name was Emie Eshmawy. And she was a writer as well, and a feminist. And she wrote more to the effect of, you have to be careful when removing the veil, because we're still an Islamic society, and we don't want you to remove the veil as a direct reaction to what the West thinks of us, which then feeds into a colonial narrative. And so we need to be able to do.
Face veil?
Yeah, it was a face veil. It was a face veil, but it was, it wasn't like the veils that you see on the face now, because the material was sometimes sheer. And so it was very different from what we know as niqab and hijab and khimar today. It was very different. So it was more over I don't want to say translucent. It was more like it had more holes in the fabric, so you could still see a portion of the face, but so it wasn't a full veil essentially. But anyhow, so she made an argument against Huda Sharawi, saying, you're removing it to make a point that we're going to be like the West, when we're trying to get away from that narrative, and we're trying to get away from this colonial narrative of, let's try to make everyone like Europe, let's try to make everyone like England and France. And I'm going to stand up and I'm going to write, but I'm not going to write as a reaction to what's happening to us by the West. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to write about how removing the veil is or is not important to Egyptian society. And from there, women can have the choice and the voice to do what they want with their veil, because it's not about keeping your veil on or taking it off. It's about how you're going to affect change by standing up as a woman. And if you have to do that through removing the veil, so be it, right? But that should not be a colonial narrative that we follow. And so I'd say those two women have had immense impacts on grassroots movements for women. And it's reverberated across the Middle East, right? So, and I think that when I'm looking at two women that are, fighting for women's rights, I'd say during a period of time that anywhere in the world it would have been strange to be divorced. Anywhere in the world it would have been strange to be married at a later age. As you know, in our society, once a girl hits 25, we got problems. She's not walking out of her dad's house anymore, right?
All the versions, the memes, and the various pressures,
and like, I always laugh
what life should look like.
Yeah, we have a word in Arabic that I hate, and I wish they would cut it out of the dictionary. And I tell all my family and friends this, and it's called aqbal. And aqbal is when you go to a graduation party in high school, your daughter goes, and then your aunt shows up, and she says, "Oh, aqbal," when you go to get your bachelor's degree, and then aqbal means to the future, basically. What's to the next step in your life, and then you go to your graduation from your bachelor's and you hear the word from your aunt aqbal, the marriage, and then you get married, and then you hear the word aqbal, you have kids, right? And so there's this aqbal represents constant social pressure. Is what it does, and that's seen in the society. I'm sure it exists in other
for sure,
Muslim societies.
For sure.
Like you see someone like Emie Eshmawy saying, yeah, okay, aqbal, that we do that, but we're going to do it on our terms.
Yeah.
And we're going to stand strong, and we're going to stand in a way in society. And actually, I love Huda Sharawi, I love Emie Eshmawy, but I have more appreciation for Emie Eshmawy because she was really looking at Egyptian society and saying, we're going to make this narrative for women from what exists here, but not what has been impacted by colonialists. So
And I
we're
think
going to make our
that's
own
the
version
most
of it.
powerful. I agree with you. That's the most powerful message to put out there, that actually, just like Islam is pro-choice, it's there as a guidance. It's there to take into account what is happening in the world climate, whether that is, it's almost a complete alien concept now within cultural means, especially here in the UK, for women to be very public, for women to be very out there, or even take on roles within, whether it's military trained, whether it's, prime minister and things like this. And I think, like we've mentioned, throughout this conversation, that actually there are big figures in our ancient history, as well as, in recent times, where Muslim women are actually saying, we are women of faith, we follow Islam, yet these are not barriers to being part of civic society and being at the top of civic society
Right.
as well.
And we're going to do it our way, not the way that the West expects.
For sure. For sure. And I
Because
think
just because what we have in, in Western society is Muslim women in Western society are viewed differently socially than they are in, North Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia. And you still have the ability to affect change in both situations. It doesn't matter what society you come from, which is why I alluded before saying that the deen does not see society, right?
and it
Deen
remains
is
unchanged.
blind to the times.
And
And deen is deen.
historically,
If you just stick to that, if you just stick to the deen and the teachings and the regulations and policies of it, you'll have a different outcome in society.
Sure. And I mean, it's interesting, again, going back to the West and the East sort of differences, or how, the narratives over the years have impacted cultural, very decisively. I think historically, the Greek philosophers were the ones that were very, pivotal in actually labeling women as weak, physically and mentally and academically. And these notions, actually, if we look at Southeast Eastern history and Islamic academia, these notions came in to the scholars of the time, the South Asian scholars, and then all of a sudden women weren't actually the same women that were honored with dignity. And Aisha radiallahu anha being responsible for the most hadith, Islam as we know it, and how it's being taught and how she was preaching it. A lot of that has been lost.
Right.
And Sheikh Akram Nadwi, I think, putting together the 40 volumes about female scholars and Sahaba at during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and beyond. I think it's been pivotal. So like we said, education is absolutely fundamental in knowing all of this and knowing our own past and actually being empowered. And sometimes, of course, it's not we don't need the West to empower us, certainly not. And we have a faith that empowers us.
Right, absolutely. And if you decide to live in the West, great. Hopefully you can affect change there. If you decide to live in North Africa, great. I hope you can affect change there too. But have a core belief system that you're drawing from. And as I said before, have a mentor. Have a mentor that you can rely on and bounce ideas off of.
For sure. And I think at the central concept of this, is it not just fairness and justice and peace for all? And that is what Islam teaches. And I hope, in this conversation, like this one, I think we should have done an extended part 2 on this. It's very important to me.
I have other authors and other people I've drawn upon I rely on historical figures. I rely on them to be able to make an argument. And because if I see that something, I probably should have been an attorney, right? To go back and look at case studies and say, oh, well, look at this. This worked here. It can work again here, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many people to look up to. There's so many people in the Muslim community to look up to. There's so many people outside of the Muslim community that care about the Muslim community to look up to as well, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So much. And I think this is why platforms like World Hijab Day and International Muslim History Month, getting that sisterhood and brotherhood together and actively, looking for allyship and connecting the dots, connecting communities, connecting people. It's so important to have platforms like this and put out a powerful message of actually we all stand for justice and peace. And, we must work together on it. We have to work together on it. So, it sort of brings us on to the last question, unfortunately, which is, are there strategies and initiatives that we can implement to support and empower Muslim women leaders that will inevitably go on to shape global politics and social justice agendas? Is there anything specific?
Yeah. So I thought about that question, and it's hard to answer that question without using the word, your change should be organic. So two things that I've learned is, one, nothing is impossible. And number two, everything has a solution. And I live by that. I don't believe in running around like a chicken with your head chopped off and not knowing what to do. And oh my gosh, there's all this stuff that needs to be changed in my community. There, these things that need to be, gradually affected in the way that I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. So strategy is key. So that's the first thing. So I think that if you want to make any change in your community, don't do it haphazardly. Virginia Woolf has a famous quote. It's one of my favorite quotes, and I don't know the exact words for it, but it's basically, don't aim your hose at randomly at the rose bush, just trying to water one rose. Be smart and do it exactly on the spot. And so otherwise the tree's not going to grow properly if you're just haphazardly watering something, right? So my first advice on how to initiate anything in the community is strategy. Be completely graceful under what you want to do. So for example, if you see in your community that there's high crime and you want to battle high crime, right? Find a way to understand not how to get rid of the crime, but where the crime is coming from. Oftentimes we see areas that have high crime are tied in with correlations of education problems. Problems in the community where the education system is not up to standard or whatnot. So that. So then maybe you could begin by going to town hall meetings where you voice your concern, town hall or board of education meetings where you voice your concern about the high crime rates, and you actually do the research and you do the work to be able to understand the statistics behind it and present it in front of a group that has the ability to make change from an electoral perspective. You see that all the time at town hall meetings in America. I mentioned it in my last talk, that if you're going to try to make change in the community, stop complaining and start doing. Because if you can't even figure out how to change what you see as a problem, then maybe you shouldn't be in the narrative, frankly. If you're going to be in the narrative, don't do it 5%, go 100% in. And if you see a problem that you have in your hands to fix, do it. If you need help, don't be afraid to reach out, get a mentor. Find a way in the community that you can be seen and your voice can be heard. We are no longer in an age where whether you're a man or a woman, especially in the West, is going to matter who brings the change to the table. And while it's hard to keep politics and people's individual narratives off of the table, don't lose focus on what you're trying to accomplish because there's some type of political issue surrounding you. The three women that I chose in the beginning of the talk, they just wanted to change society and they rose to the highest levels. And if they can do it, any other woman can do it as well.
Wow. Subhanallah. I'll be honest, especially the last few sentences, I'm just totally in awe of, because that's exactly what perhaps stops people in their tracks, the adversity that they might face. And there's plenty of adversity to go around. Again, being Muslim women, with the current climate of global politics right now, the way the media frames, I mean, it's shocking to the core that even, anyone with half a brain can still not see right through exactly what's going on. I mean, I think it's abysmal, and again, this stands us in, solidarity, hopefully, with people of truth and justice, that we need, genuine partnerships and connection for us to make the world a better place. Can't believe, as cliche as that sounds,
Yeah, I mean, it's really true, and I think that too many people are not. Many people want good for the world, but they don't have a strategy for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
what it comes down to me. So for me, I don't see, and for me, nothing is impossible. As ridiculous as that sounds, I don't see
I love that.
impossibility. I don't. I really don't. I see. Okay, well, here's the problem. Give me the process. What's the process to fix it? And then actually do that process. But to run around weakly and arrogantly and think that you're just going to get what you want the way that you want it, very wrong way of thinking. There's no strategy. Remaining graceful, remaining calm, and calculated and strategic without being devious. You don't have to be devious to be smart, I mean, simple changes. I think during the Arab Spring in Egypt, there was a lot of garbage in the streets, right? And some politician must have seen that there's garbage in the streets, and one of the major sources of income for the GDP in Egypt is tourism. Well, if we continue to have garbage in the streets, people are not going to want to come. And so someone must have seen that and decided, let's just do a drive to get rid of all the garbage in the streets of Egypt, whoever it was. And it worked because tourism is doing excellent in Egypt now. And granted, we're, 12, 13 years after the Arab Spring. But someone is seeing changes. Someone is seeing differences by these small discussions, by going to these town hall meetings. If you live in a community, and everybody lives in a community, find a way to make your voice heard at local town planning meetings. And yes, I'm saying that as an urban planner, but find a way to get into the meetings and even just sit and listen and hear and look at the meeting notes. Like, if you want to make change, you're going to find a way to do it. Nothing is impossible, frankly.
For sure. Now, I want to say a very huge thank you to you for your time and sharing so much with us. And I think it's all been throughout this has been empowering. And what technology has allowed us to do is, while you're sitting across the waters very far away from me, and I'm here in the UK, and then we're having messages from Nigeria, from Bangladesh, and our voice is able to go so far. So alhamdulillah for that. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing a lovely, not even a powerful insight. That's what I want to say. I don't want to use just lovely. It's been lovely to connect with you, and it's been a powerful discussion. So thank you so much, Dr. Emie. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, who else is tuned in right now and watching, please do connect with Dr. Emie and follow her journey. It's been an insightful morning. Sorry and apologies for starting a little bit later, and we have overrun today, but I think it was just so many powerful messages. And as a strong Muslim woman, I do hope so many of us will take from this, and the brothers who are listening as well, if everyone can share these powerful messages, that actually within our history, we have so many powerful Muslim women who shaped what society is like today for our Muslim communities. Unfortunately, the global climate right now, it's not very difficult to avoid. Actually, it's all over the social media. We have the stories coming out of Gaza, we have stories coming out of Sudan. We know what's happening. Humanity is almost at a loss. And if anything, I think my message would be today is, as women, we have a duty to play. We have a purpose to fulfill. So whatever changes we can affect, please do, with whatever skill sets Allah has blessed you with, whatever networks Allah has blessed you with. On the blessed day of today, which is Jummah, please don't forget our brothers and sisters who are suffering around the world. Whatever injustices they are being faced with right now, may Allah make it easy for them. May Allah show us the way, guide us to a united humanity, to humanity where we can also live with peace and not just, traumatized and dejected. We aren't of a faith that stands for being dejected for too long. We have to look to our faith in difficult times, and this is exactly what it is right now. It's very, very difficult times, and now is the time to, more than ever, is to connect with our brothers and sisters from all faiths and none, to stand against injustice. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless everyone who's working behind the scenes for platforms like this to exist. Of course, Nazma Khan, our founder, Ashley, who's been looking after the tech side today. And, in the future, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to impact change, whether we are women or whether we are men. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for our future generations to show us. And there has to be a shout out to the students and the future generations who are standing up unapologetically, unequivocally on the right side of justice and history. So without further ado, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Shreen Mahmood, and we shall see you next week with another session, same time, same place. Take care. God bless. Assalamu alaikum.